Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And as you can see, we are joined by Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
Hey, glad to be here as always.
We're glad to have you. And today we're talking The Prestige, directed by Christopher Nolan, starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale. Of course, we've talked about a few Christopher Nolan films over the course of the 127 episodes of Podcast 2 for 1. And there's even some secret episodes that never made it to air, actually, about a Christopher Nolan movie as well. But if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, the notification bell. That way you're up to date on all future episodes of Podcast 2 for 1, as well as the cool content we have at 2 for 1 Studios, youtube.com/2 for 1 Studios, the best place to consume the content. And of course, if you didn't know, and boy oh boy, I bet you did not, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year. Kapow. I'm a professional, boys. I can get the whole goddamn thing.
I was actually really impressed. I was like, "Do you have a script there or anything?"
I don't. Nice. I've said it 127 times. That's or close to it.
We need to start timing you. We need to start timing you and like seeing how quickly you can get through it without stumbling or anything. We'll have like a leaderboard.
Yeah, it's hit or miss whether I stumble or not. So that one I felt pretty good about. So I had to comment about it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Guys, we're live right now. Of course,
Donovan is.
That's true. Yeah, my H2O overload. But right now we are live on YouTube. Of course, if we have comments, we will bring those in as we discuss. But again, we're talking about The Prestige. It's one that we've in private, and I think on the pod previously we've talked about like what other Nolan films, what other movies that could have interesting structure we could talk about. And we've always danced around this one. I think it's finally time we're talking about it. I watched it yesterday, first time I've seen it in maybe a year or two, but I can say for myself, every time I do watch it, it's a treat. It's such a good movie, and I really impressed by it every time I see it. So real quick, general impressions. I'm going to start with Mr. or Dr. Bruce Hutchinson. Sorry, Mr. is not good enough. Dr. Bruce Hutchinson. And let us know your thoughts
call me
on
Dr. Mister.
Yeah. Dr. Mister. I like it. I like it. Mr. Doctor. There we go.
Mr. Doctor, I think.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Yeah, I love The Prestige. I hadn't watched it in a couple of years as well. It's always been my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I think it probably still is my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. This is the first time I've tried to sort of break it down or analyze it in any way because I just love it so much that whenever I watch it, I just enjoy it. Plus, it always seemed super complicated because, it's got these multiple timelines and we know what Christopher Nolan movies are like. It turns out I think that it is a little more simple than I thought it was, which is good, because I think if it were overly complicated, it would probably make it too hard a movie to follow or too hard a movie to watch. So I think the structure is actually a little simpler than it seems. And maybe when we're talking through, we can sort of talk about how many timelines there are and stuff, because I never really stopped to try to figure that out until this time. So that was a lot of fun. And I'm also, I'm really curious, and during our discussion, I'm really want to hear from you guys whether there's a character you root for. That is, we've got these two characters competing, Angier and Borden, and I'm really curious because I always thought the movie was favoring one character and I always favored the other character, and I'm kind of curious how you guys feel about it, so I'm really looking forward to digging into that too. But yeah, I love it. Love the movie.
Yeah, same. I mean, just like you going into it, I was pretty sure this is my favorite Christopher Nolan film. And I think it is on a technical level and on just like a storytelling. It's kind of a technical masterclass, I think, in a lot of ways, especially in terms of movies with big twists. That the twist is a part of, the appeal and what the movie's about. I think this is maybe the best twist that I can remember in cinema, and as far as it making sense with everything you've seen so far, it not feeling like they're just pulling it out of nowhere, and it really being integrated into like the plot itself, because the whole plot is about illusionists and what's the trick, what's the twist of their illusion, right? So yeah, I loved it. I think I do think there's a very interesting conversation to be had about who is the protagonist, or who does the film want us to be rooting for, because up until like through Act 3, I felt pretty sure of who the film's was ultimately the perspective that the film was taking, but I feel even by the end of the movie, it even takes another twist in terms of perspective, in terms of who we're aligned with, that is really interesting. And I do think it's really interesting in terms of like what happens in each. I kind of broke the film down by acts. That kind of worked well for my understanding of it. And I think it's interesting just even how long the film takes to get into like the meat of the main plot. There's a lot of setup. There's a lot of exposition and bouncing between timelines to do that. And it really works really well. I think that's one of the most impressive parts of it, is that it doesn't follow your typical 20-minute inciting incident. We know what the main goal of these characters are through the rest of the film format. And it exceeds in that. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with this, but still love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of cap it all off, I mean, I think it's a fantastic movie. I'm not sure it's my favorite Nolan film, just because I am a sucker for Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and I also really do love Inception. But it's one of those ones that like I said, when I watch it, I'm just always blown away by, like how you said, Daniel, the technicality of it, and just like a masterclass of all the different things, and I love always seeing Wally Pfister's work, and you can there's even some shots and like that looks like that was like literally a shot from The Dark Knight Rises or the early Batman Begins.
Absolutely.
Just with the colors are all like, it could be the same universe, that's so similar. Just a testament of how consistent Wally Pfister is. No, I think it's a great question too, Bruce, that we'll kind of track there of who I'm aligned with, or who I'm rooting for. But yeah, let's kind of get into it. The movie starts off, one thing that's so interesting about it, and it carries this all the way through, is that not only do we have Michael Caine's character start the narration, but then it goes into basically Christian Bale's character in prison, right? And he's reading a diary with Hugh Jackman's narration. And then Hugh Jackman is reading a diary. It's reading Christian Bale's diary, right? So it's like these different layers, and also it's unreliable. So it's already, we're kind of setting up these Inception-like layers of storytelling, and then we're bouncing back and forth. So let's kind of dive into that. What do you guys think about this opening 20-30 minutes here, setting up our characters, setting up the antagonist, protagonist, and who are you guys aligned with going into this? Because there's 3 different people talking automatically in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and I'll even add, by the way, that actually Borden, Christian Bale's character, actually says the first thing. Like, he has a line, and then Cutter's talking, and then we do the diaries. So it's even more complicated. Yeah, it's a crazy beginning, because, I think when we start talking about maybe where we all broke it up in acts and kind of how that works, there is a sense of thinking about the story actually in chronological order, and that the climaxes, I think, basically come in chronological order. And yet we've got a first act that, kind of like you were saying, there's almost nothing, we bounce around so much between the different storylines that in terms of how often in the first act we're actually like at the start of the story chronologically, we're not there that long. And yet at the same time, by the time we get to sort of the first really climactic moment, which I would say is when Angier's girlfriend Julia dies in the water tank trick gone bad, we're 25, 28 minutes into the movie. We've only actually spent like 5 minutes at the beginning of the timeline. The rest of the time we've jumped around, and yet that climax is still really powerful. I mean, it's really amazing given how little we've been with the characters, from the start of the movie when they're both sort of magician's assistants, and I think we hear it in one of the diaries, that they're both sort of like these. It sort of sets them up as friends, these great friends who loved magic and wanted to take the world, by the horns or whatever, and just get to the top, and how quickly that gets derailed. It's really amazing that we can hardly spend any time there, get 25 minutes in, have that big event, and be invested emotionally in it because of the other ways we've gotten to know the characters through the different timelines.
Yeah, I agree. I think, every time we every time we jump time frames or jump to the past, jump to the future, I do feel like obviously in the past there's a lot of plot happening, a lot of things occurring, or even over narration or under narration. And then a lot of times I think, when we pop out to these characters, we're getting almost like character reactions in the future to things that happened in the past, right? Like we're getting Christian Bale chuckling at something that Angier wrote in his diary, or vice versa, right? And I think it's really interesting how it uses these, which in some ways I guess is a lot of times how movies that work with flashbacks, I'm thinking of like overt uses like The Princess Bride, like we're popping out of the present time, or at least the present time of the plot that we're following, into a future tense to, for one, get a character reaction, so we're getting to know Angier better, we're getting to know Borden better, but it also uses those to set up so much little pieces of intrigue. And I think, this film it's one of those things that once you know the twist and you watch it again, it's definitely one of those films that is actually, I think, almost more enjoyable to watch the second time once you know, because of how layered the foreshadowing is and how layered the amount of times that they're telling you what's happening on screen, just straight to your face over and over again. But yeah, I think it's pretty, I think like you may have mentioned this, Bruce, it almost shouldn't work how much we're jumping to different characters' perspectives and different timelines, but it does. And I think, that's again, kind of the I think one of the marvels of, like I said, when I think it's kind of technically a masterpiece, is that it's able to be unconventional and yet be as effective or more effective than many movies are at pulling us in and having us, very invested into these really two characters. But I do think, it's worth mentioning, like at this point, which I kind of marked it like the end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2, when I think Angier's wife dies. I think it was his wife at that point. I don't know. Who do you feel like you're aligned with at this point in the film? Because I feel like, for me, I think, and this is mainly because I think we start with him he's the first person that gets the journal and starts reading. For me, this is a Borden act, really. This is where I feel like we're getting more from Borden. We get that great line when they're watching the Chinaman illusionists, about this is the act. Everything he's doing, he's living the act, which is a great foreshadowing of Borden's arc and stuff. But yeah, who do y'all feel aligned the most with once I guess maybe leading right up to Angier's wife dying, because maybe Angier's wife dying shifts your allegiance even in that moment.
Before we answer that, I do just want to make sure that we address one point which I think is really important, which is even before we start flashing back, one of the very first events, 3-4 minutes into the movie, Angier dies, right? I mean, the movie basically starts with Angier dying and Borden being put in jail for that crime, right? In fact, the diaries are introduced with Borden already in jail, right? So, like in my notes, I've got, the solicitor shows up and gives Borden Angier's diary from Lord Cordlow, right? That's 7 minutes into the movie. So 7 minutes into the movie, and of course the first 2 minutes is Michael Caine explaining, the whole setup of a magic trick. So within 5 minutes, we've had someone get killed, someone get put in jail, and we've launched the story through the introduction of the one journal, and then a few minutes later, we're flashing to Angier reading Borden's journal. That's all happened within 8 minutes, right? So first of all, we've got a lot going on with that, but also I think that potentially influences who we're influenced, or excuse me, who we're aligned with. So, sorry, Donovan, what are your thoughts on Daniel's question?
I mean, I think we're aligned with Christian Bale's character first. I mean, just the way it starts out with his narration, the way we're in prison with him, and it's kind of like we're, if you follow the Inception layers, right? We're starting with him, so it's like it's his thought process reading Angie's diary, right? And then it's Angie's diary, or it's Angie. It kind of gets a little complicated sometimes. Angier, sorry, but it gets a little complicated. But I definitely think it's Christian Bale, just because, for those reasons, but also it kind of leads into, I don't know, I'm trying to think now. I also have it playing here next to me as well. I don't know. I don't know yet.
I wanted to jump in and say that it's funny that you Bruce, you brought up that point about what happens in those first 7 minutes. And the thing is, by the end of the movie, I'm almost forgotten they've even shown us that already, right? And I think that is a really you're right. So much is happening, and so much that we just clearly don't understand and aren't meant to understand fully yet. Like, why is Borden just staring at Angier in the tank? Why isn't he trying to break it open? Or why, just all of these little things that I feel like it sets up a lot of intrigue that I think it waits until basically like Act 4 to start going beyond the events that it gives us right in the beginning. But anyway, yeah, no, I think I agree though. I think Donovan, you're right. I think it is a Borden act. I feel like we're getting more inside his philosophy, or even I would say he has a stronger goal in this act than Angier's does. Angier's wants to be a successful magician, where I feel like Borden is trying to like perfect a craft, or like it's more of like this. He has that line. He's like, "This is the only way we escape all this," right? When he's kind of referring to when they're watching the Chinese guy with the walking crippled to his car. His motivation for becoming the best at this is because it's something innate inside of him that's just driving him towards this. It's a passion. It's an obsession already, perhaps. Whereas, I think with Angier's, it's more like, well, he wants to have a fun job and he wants to be good. He wants to be admired, but I don't feel like it's the same level of commitment from both characters in this first act.
Well, I think, part of that is just that we don't understand Angier's motivations for being a magician until the end of the movie, right. That we get a hint partway through, which we'll get to, kind of the halfway point of the movie, where it seems like he's got a very selfish reason, that it's about the limelight and that sort of thing. And then at the end, I think we discover that it's a little more in-depth and complicated than that. For me, the first act kind of feels a little more balanced between the two of them. What's interesting is that, we're always, because we're moving around, we're sometimes dealing with goals that actually play out in more than one act. So usually we have an act goal and it's very straightforward, right? A character has a goal at the end of the act. They either succeed or fail at that goal, and then that establishes a new goal for the next act. But here we've got characters who are simultaneously pursuing the act goal maybe for that act, but then they're also pursuing a later act goal because of the nature of the time division. And I would say that, Dana, you're right. We do understand Borden's motivations better, I think, in this first act. But interestingly, I think we get more goals of Angier's than we get of Borden's, if that makes sense. So I think you hit it on the nail on the head in terms of like the goal at the start of the chronology, not at the start of the movie, but at the start of when we track their lives, is they both want to be successful magicians, right? And I do think that's kind of the Act 1 goal, but we know more about that goal from Borden's point of view than we do from Angier's point of view. But we also have two other timelines. We have sort of all three timelines, right? So we've got Borden's timeline, which is him in jail, right? He doesn't seem to have a goal while he's in jail, or at least initially have a goal. He develops one later, but it's pretty passive, which is just reading these diaries and then sort of trying to bargain with keeping his daughter, you know, in the family or whatever. Angier, on the other hand, is in the Colorado timeline, right? He's sort of in our middle timeline, and he actually has a goal in that timeline as well, right? Which is to, I mean, we don't know it yet, but it's to develop the transported man trick, right? To have an even better version of that trick. But he's already pursuing that goal in Act 1 when he goes to Colorado. So it's kind of interesting because, you know, on the one hand, maybe Borden's goal is more developed in terms of the early chronology, but Angier actually has two goals that I think are driving him in Act 1, whereas Borden only seems to have one, and maybe that counterbalances it a little bit. I don't know.
I see that. I feel like the only part I would argue against, I guess, that idea is that I guess, like, since the only thing we know, I guess for me, you're right. Borden's, I guess, future Borden, his goal in Act 1 is read letters, but at the same time, all we know of Angier's goal is to get something from Tesla, right? Like that's all we know of his goal too. We assume, yes, it has something to do with magicians, right? And so it feels more important, I guess. But at the same time, I don't feel like we're not seeing him. When we're flashing forward, you know, right at the beginning, we see him do some things towards that goal, right? He checks into the hotel, he walks up the mountain, he gets shocked, he gets told go away. But the rest of the time we're with him in the act, he's just reading the journal. So
well, maybe you're right. I'm trying to remember when is it in this act or is it in the next act when he talks to Tesla's assistant and he sees the diary and he says, you know, this is a cipher, and then he sort of figures out that he's trying to track down a trick from a rival. Is that in the first act or the second act? I don't remember.
I think it's Act 2.
I believe it is, because I'm pretty sure it happens after we know what. I'm pretty sure that happens at least in between Angier's wife dying and the reveal of Borden's trick.
I think you're right, because I think that's how Angier gets invited to go see Tesla. The assistant comes and they have drinks together at the hotel, and then that kind of gets things going enough that then he gets word to come see Tesla.
Well, and he says, he says in that conversation, like, I want, you made this for a competitor of mine. You made this machine for him, and I want you to make it for me too. So I'm pretty sure, that's either right around the time where we first see the Borden trick, the first teleporting man trick, or right after. I think it's right around there.
Yeah.
So that line, that's implying that at that time, Angier thinks that Tesla made that same machine for Borden. Is that what I always kind of was wondering, who is this other competitor? But I guess it's just he's so ingrained in his brain that Borden has the same machine. Is that what it is?
It's never explained, but I think that Angier thinks that, because Borden has, later in the movie, Borden gives him the diary, right, and says that the cipher is Tesla, and so he assumes that Tesla built the machine that will allow him to do the magic trick. Of course, Tesla didn't build him a machine to do that magic trick because he doesn't use a machine to do that magic trick. But we do see later on when he dresses the trick up that he has the same sort of ball with lightning, and so I think that's probably the device that Tesla made for Borden, which is, doesn't really do anything, right? It just has all the flashing lights on it. But they don't explain it. They never say that. I think you just kind of have to guess that.
And I do think that is probably a little soft because the way they infer it, right, is that like Michael Caine sends Angier's to the Tesla Expo thing I think this is Act 2 or 3, and he sees Borden there, and he sees Borden watching, and then he follows him, and that's when he ends up. That's when he actually, I think, ends up like capturing Fallon and burying him alive. That's when he sees Borden with his family and gets jealous. Yeah,
he gets mad. Yeah.
So, and I would say that, like, I don't think the film, other than Hugh Jackman just telling us that Tesla built Christian Bale a machine, there's no other reason for us there's no other evidence presented for that, right? Other than Borden being at the expo and then giving him the password as Tesla. And then we see the electricity, which you're right. I guess we're supposed to infer that, like, he just bought a generator and stuck it on top of some boxes, kind of thing.
Well, and I think part of why we have to assume that is, I think it comes up more than once, but like Angier says those things to Tesla and his assistant, and they don't disagree. They never say, "What are you talking about? We never built a thing for a rival magician." So I think the assumption is that he did, but we don't really know what that device might be, which again is why I assume it's just sort of the electric ball. I forget there's a name for that thing, the Tesla ball.
It is revealed though that they were basically like living off Angier's investments though. So there is like some like there's an inch of
maybe they were lying.
Lying.
Right.
I guess that
right.
Yeah, there is something weird there. That's what I was that's why I got confused just now thinking about it. It's like, even Tesla has this he's foreboding, right? He's saying like this will only bring you pain, and obviously he knows what he's made for Angier, but like it for me it was implied that like even this it brought pain to even the first guy that he made whatever for, like, so like if it doesn't do anything, then like what pain did it create, or what was the destruction?
Starts to feeling like a lie.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that he is just sort of an ominous character, and he can see that these magicians are being driven further and further, and when they start playing with electricity and various things, that it's just going to be dangerous. But you're right. The implication is that it was dangerous for the first guy, but there is no first guy who had anything dangerous that we're aware of. So, yeah, there is a bit of a either, again, he's lying or he's being vague, or it's a little bit of a plot hole. But, I mean, it's a pretty minor issue overall.
It does, and I think part of the reason it works is because they set up Tesla so early that we're kind of like not even we actually see Angier's coming for Tesla before we're like aware of Borden's and their rivalry and all that stuff. So I feel like we're just already into the idea that he's there with Tesla, and that Tesla, I just think it's a little bit weak of a plot point, but I think obviously it's taking us like dissecting it to even notice it.
Yeah.
So.
Right. You're right.
I do say, regardless of where we fall on the alignment issue, I certainly would agree that I don't think we're aligned with Angier, so I'd either say we're balanced or we're more aligned with Borden. But as you referred to earlier, Daniel, I would say that changes when we have the Act 1 climax and Julia is killed in the accident, and then we have the funeral, and we begin to see more of the growing rivalry between the two magicians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of great stuff in the second act here. I mean, just first of all, setting up one thing I talk about one-liners a lot is the idea of setting things up and paying them off. And this movie feels like it does it every 5 minutes. It's setting something up that will eventually pay off. And even at her funeral scene where we're talking, where Michael Caine is talking to Angier, and he's like talking about drowning. Like just something subtle like that, which seems like not a throwaway line, but something it's like, not as impactful becomes super impactful at the end of the movie. Something like that, setting that up is, I think, always impressive in my book. But
movie's fantastic with that, by the way, both in dialogue and in plot. In the first act, when I guess it's Sarah is Borden's girlfriend, and they see the kid sees the trick with birds, and then the kid says, "Where's his brother?" Right?
It just gave me the movie, right?
Completely tells you what the trick is.
It's constant. It's one of those things like You know, once you see, it's like I remember watching it the first time and being like, "Holy shit!" He's got a brother, and like I couldn't recognize that being Christian Bale, but watching it this time, I'm like, how did I
it was
not
obvious.
know?
Yeah.
Like with all the references, it's like every 10 minutes, like someone says about. I mean, even like today, you don't mean it with "I love you," it just know
Yes.
everything.
Or
It's like there's so
when
many
she
of
tells
those.
him when she tells him she's pregnant, he's like, "Oh, we should have told Fallon." Like,
Exactly.
that's the first thing that comes out of his mouth, right? He's
Yeah.
like, we should have told him. Yeah, going into Act 2, I definitely feel like, if we're talking about the character perspectives again, I think we definitely become more aligned with Angiers over Act 2 and 3, mainly because his goal begins to evolve and change in ways that Borden's doesn't for me over those next 2 acts. His goal's roughly the same, which is building towards the trick, which is just to be a successful magician, like, or illusionist, whatever. That's his goal for Act 2 and 3. And Angiers becomes to defeat Borden. It becomes an antagonistic relationship. He doesn't want to just be successful. He wants to crush Borden. He wants to make him pay, get revenge, really.
It's
and
really
then,
revenge, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And then in Act 3, it still is revenge, but I think it also kind of evolves into something a bit more at that point too, which I think we'll get to when we get more to Act 3. But yeah, Act 2 I kind of just labeled the rivalry, because it's the whole act is just them kind of going back and forth, but it's always instigated by Angiers. And they even have that line, when Borden does retaliate, he's like, listen, Michael Caine, I think, is like, if you leave it now, he was probably just getting you back, for the finger thing. If you left it now, you can just go your separate ways. But Angier can't do that. But yeah. So yeah, this is an Angier act for me, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And not only, I think you've got it pretty good, but Angier's goal in getting revenge, yes, he wants to get revenge, but that's almost like the motivation. The movie does give him specific things, which he is trying to recreate the transported man, right? And he's trying to do it better. Not only is he trying to figure it out, but he's trying to figure out how to do it for himself and potentially do it better. So that's a very specific goal, right? That's something that can have a lot of moving pieces, which of course it does, right? He's doing all kinds of different things to try to figure this out. And it's actually overlapping both timelines, right? Because when he's in Colorado, which is sort of still a future timeline, he's trying to do that. And when he's sort of in the present, or the past timeline, where he's getting revenge, he's also trying to do that, right? And one part of it is getting it from Tesla, and the other part of it is figuring out how to do the double, and finding Gerald Root,
I would say that's,
and all of that kind of stuff.
I would say that's Act 3, though, for me. I think I agree with all that, but I don't think that happens until 53 minutes is the first time we see Borden's teleporting man act. So I feel like for me, between 25 minutes, which is when Angier's wife dies, and then the next 25 minutes are just, I feel like for me, all they're setting up really is Angier's hatred for Borden, because at that point it's the gun thing. So he shoots his finger off, just trying to, at that point, just kill him. And then Borden comes back with the bird trick and has the bird killed when
right.
Angiers opens up his new set, right? And then I'm trying to think, there was one more, I think. Does Borden go back again? Or does Angiers attack? I can't remember what the next one is. The other one may be him kidnapping Fallon and putting Fallon in a box. I think that actually is the next thing that happens from Angier's side. And all of that happens before.
I think that's a lot later, actually, but yeah.
Is it?
The only thing physical that I can think of is Angier's breaking his leg. But I'll say this too, adding in the physical harm and his leg being broken, that also orients us narratively, visually, when we see him limping throughout the future part of it, when Angiers is a Tesla, he's limping the entire time. So it always, whenever we're in that scene and he's walking, we automatically know we know where we're at, story wise, just because of his limp. And so stuff like that is why I think is super smart too, about layering in, they didn't have to break his leg, but doing that like reorients us visually where we're at, you know, because he looks the same visually. Like he looks like Hugh Jackman in every scene, you know.
No, you're right. I mean, the limping allows us to understand a timeline because basically once that happens, he goes to Colorado. And of course, it also is a big part of the paralleling of the characters. They both suffer physical injuries. They both have there's drownings that they're both involved with. You know, I mean, just all these different things. They both have doubles of different kinds. You know, so there are so many reverberations. But Daniel, to your point about the structure, I actually put that second act climax a little later. I put it at the 60-minute mark when Angier first performs the trick with Gerald. So for me, what drives Act 2 is Angier's attempts to do the transported man, and at the end of the act, he's successful, but he's under the stage, right? So it's only a surface success, right? Because that's what's going to drive him in the next act. I mean, if it had worked and he had been on the stage, that probably would have been the end of it. But it's like he's not fulfilled by, if he had, I mean, we don't know because we don't know fully what he would have done with Borden. But overall, he's under the stage and he's not getting the applause. And that's part of what drives him to go see Tesla and try to get a better version of.
Is it not Borden sabotaging that actually does that? Is it not Borden?
I think both of them.
Messes with the okay.
I think it's both of them. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think yes.
There's sort of an internal and an external, right?
Yes,
there's an external, which
absolutely.
is that he's been sabotaged by Borden and Root, but there's also an internal, which is it's not really satisfying him anyway.
Yes, I agree, and I agree with you about that. What you said about the Act 2 climax and stuff too. I had it labeled a little differently, but upon hearing that, I agree with you. And looking at it too, I was scrubbing through a little bit while y'all were talking. I do think we do spend a lot of time in the future at the beginning of Act 2. We spend a lot of time with Borden in jail. This is where we finally meet Tesla. And that whole thing starts happening. And really, a lot of this time in the future, we're really starting to set up even the end right now because it doesn't have as much to do with like the current events. This is more like starting to sprinkle in the setup for the finale. Is a lot what those scenes are doing.
Yeah, and we're also introducing two big characters. Fanon, of course, is referenced in Act 1, but we don't see him until Act 2. And then, of course, Olivia shows up in Act 2 as well, Scarlett Johansson's character. So I'm curious at this point. So we've sort of said, okay, so either let's even go with what you guys said. Act 1 is maybe a little more aligned with Borden. Act 2 is I think definitely more aligned with Angier, but not just from an alignment point of view, but actually sort of from a rooting for point of view. Are you rooting for Angier at this point at the end of Act 2, sort of halfway through, or are you rooting for Borden? How do you feel about the two characters?
Definitely rooting for Angier just for the fact that his wife dies in the end of Act 1. It really feels like, I mean, it paints even Borden's character as that he's someone who thinks he's a great magician, but he's someone who thinks that he knows better than everybody else, and because of that ego, she dies. And granted, it was her decision too. It seems like she said, "Hey, do that," right? And they were talking about it even beforehand. But it's still, it to me implies that if he had done what he was supposed to do, she wouldn't be dead. And so from that, it's hard to not be rooting for Angier's, in my opinion. And also Christian Bale he seems more like, I feel like we always know less about him in the movie and like what his goal, like I feel like we know less about like how he's achieving things because we're always with Angier's and Angier's always questioning like how is he doing this kind of stuff. So it kind of automatically paints him as like someone mysterious, someone in the shadows, where like in Act 2 specifically Angier's is more open about that kind of stuff. At least he is to us about like his ability, how he accomplishes things, and of course his wife just died. So to me it's that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie's really good at giving you plenty of reasons to dislike both of them, right? Like I think, and I'm trying to recall to like my first viewing of this, and I do think the first time I was definitely in Angier's side of things at this point in the film. I do think this is another thing where knowing what happened, knowing the ending, can slightly skew how you feel about it on a rewatch, who you're feeling more aligned with once you know what's playing out. Um, but yeah, I think you are, and it's just by an inch towards Angier's, and I think it's because of his wife's death and because of Borden's involvement in it, and him continually saying, "I don't know what I did." So you're like, is he? Did what's going on? Did he have a mental break, or is he like like blacking out because he doesn't want to admit and which I think the film pretty much shows us that he tied the more dangerous knot, like that the film shows us that. But man, like, whether it's Angier's treatment of Scarlett Johansson's character or Borden's, especially if you don't know his treatment of his wife and his child and like everyone else, you really, it's hard to say I'm completely rooting for either of them as much as I'm rooting to know what's going. Like, I guess like what's mainly driving me is to figure out what's going on, right? To figure out what are these guys hiding from each other? How are these guys doing it? It's almost like a morbid curiosity than it is like, oh, I hope this guy does something good and pulls through, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and I'm asking because I am tipping my hand a little bit in terms of where we'll be at the ending. But yeah, I feel not even just an inch. I feel much stronger that I'm in Angier's camp than in Borden's camp. And I think one of the things that even haunts me at the end as I'm sort of dealing with, Daniel, you're right, both characters do some despicable things. But you're also right that I think it's very clear that Borden purposefully chose to do the more complicated knot. Donovan, you mentioned that Julia agrees, but of course it's the middle of the show. It's very hard for her to like.
Yeah, I get it.
Like, no, don't. It's like it's under pressure, right? I mean, it's not like he said it before the show. He literally like, hey, are you up for this right now? And I think it's hard for her, maybe to decline as much as she could. But
I mean, I don't know if I agree with. To be fair, they have a whole conversation backstage where she's like, "We can do it. We can do that knot."
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
So that kind of
I agree.
Paints that a little bit.
Yeah, she is confident that she can do it, but it's also like one of those. It's almost like a dare, It's like it's hard to turn down the dare when you're right in the middle of it. But regardless, then twice, Angier challenges Borden and asks which knot you tied. And Daniel, as you said, both times he says he can't remember. And for me, I just can't believe that, right? I mean, it's, as you said, it's perfectly obvious that he consciously chose to tie the more difficult knot because he even asked, he asked her permission, right? With a look, but, so he never in the movie acknowledges that he is responsible, right? Not once does he take responsibility for that. He just keeps saying, I don't know. And I always find that, I'm not saying it's a problem with the movie, but it's certainly a problem with how I see Borden, especially when we get to the second half of the movie and maybe we get to know Borden a little better.
I always feel like, sorry, Daniel. I always feel like when he asks Borden that, he's always asking the brother who didn't actually tie the knot. Yes. That's what I always kind of assumed. But they're always so intertwined. He would have had to have told whichever one didn't do it. They would have had to have told each other, "Hey, I tied this knot. I fucked up." They had to have. So like, I agree with both of you.
Maybe he didn't though. Did he have to? Did he? I mean, he could have said which knot did you tie, and just never answered him out of his own like guilt of just. In fact, that feels very believable for Borden's character. That if he did make a mistake, he won't own up to it. But the interesting part about that is that's only half of Borden.
Right.
Only one person actually made that mistake. And I think, to me, it's not completely clear which one's in the cell at the end. So I don't even know if the right one got punished, I guess, at the end of the film. But, yeah, I agree with Donovan. Like, that's how I always kind of read it, was that he was asking every time he was asking the twin that didn't do it, and that frustration that you saw, like, I don't know, I don't know, I can't remember, is like his frustration that he has been asking the other one and he like can't get a straight answer kind of thing. But I mean, we're inferring a lot, to be fair.
Well,
I think it's Fallon ties the knot, personally.
I think you're probably right, but you know, one of the real challenges of this movie, especially at the end, is how you deal with Borden as a character, right? Because he's two people.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible not to treat him as one person because it's Borden and Fannin, but because we really never know who is who. I mean, he tells us at the end that Fannin, you know, Borden is in love with Olivia, and Fannin is in love with Sarah, right? So it's Fannin's daughter, I mean, we don't really know. Who knows? Because they were both, but we assume that it's Fannin's daughter, right? And Fannin is the one that's alive at the end. But we say Fannin, but of course he tells us that both of them were Fannin and both of them were Borden. So it's a shorthand to say, you know, because when we were seeing Fannin that he, you know, but yeah, we don't know. We don't know who ever did what. We don't know who lost their, I mean, I guess, yeah, again, we don't know who killed or who was responsible partly for Julia's death. So if that was Borden, then he talked to Fannin both other times and he shot Fannin's fingers off and then Borden chopped them off, but it could be the opposite, right? I mean, it's so hard to know. And then do you excuse one half of the set of brothers for being less culpable in all of this than the other or not, right? I mean,
that's the
super
thing.
Tricky. Yeah.
I just have a hard time believing that they didn't tell each other which knot he did. I mean, I feel like every night they have like a meeting over coffee, like, what'd you do today? You know, like, I feel like that's always happening every day, every second of them. And but I do feel like, I don't know. I guess it's weird because you're right. They are interchangeable. I always feel like when we do see Fannin, then it's always like, that is him, but it could be the other one at the same time. It is complicated.
The only time we know who is who is when they are around their prospective loved ones.
Yes.
That's the only time the movie lets us know. And the only thing we know is this isn't the one that loved this one, or this is the one that loves Sarah, or it's not the one that loves Sarah. We don't know if that's we don't know who that is, though. We don't know if that's Borden or if that's Fannin. We just know it's not the one in love with this one. I
do feel like Christian Bale, even when he's not around the loved ones, he does play either or brother throughout the movie. Like, I feel like, you know, one of them, the one who likes, what's the wife? Not Sarah. What's the other one? The first wife, the wife.
Olivia.
The one who likes Olivia.
The wife is Sarah.
Okay, the one who likes Sarah is like the more happier, playful one, right? And the one who likes Scarlett Johansson is Olivia. The sterner, quieter one. And I feel like that comes out even when he's talking to Hugh Jackman and these other people. I feel like that those personalities do peek out every now and then. I mean, I was also looking for them hardcore because I knew what was happening, but I feel like he does do that too. So you could really just be like nice Borden and stern Borden, you know?
Yeah, it's super hard to track, but I do think you're right. And I think the main thing there, and Dan, you're right about being able to tell because of who they're with, is that when we see, and again, I'm going to call Borden, just for easy sake, Borden is the one who loves Sarah and Fannin is the one who loves Olivia. Well, no, I've got that backwards. See, I've already confused it. Fannin is the one who loves Sarah, and Borden is the one who loves Olivia. Yeah, and so basically what I'm trying to say is that when we see Borden with Olivia, he's kind of a jerk, right? I mean, he can be a jerk. Whichever one it is, that character we see being a jerk, right? To the best of our knowledge, we don't see the other one ever being a jerk. For one thing, we don't ever have any indication that when we're seeing somebody with Olivia, the assistant, it always seems to be the one who's in love with her, right? I don't ever think we feel like it's not. So we never see him being bad. So I think you're right. We do set up, I probably got all the names wrong in there, but we do set up one character as at times treating other people poorly. And it seems like the other brother, we don't ever see him treating anyone poorly to the best of our knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think he is the one who survives at the end.
The
bad
one
one
that treats the bad one.
The good one. The good one.
Okay.
No,
Yeah,
the
I
good
think so
one.
too.
And I think that's supposed to be the idea is we see, because it's 2 versus 1, but we sort of see this one guy and this other guy, and they're both super obsessed and they treat everyone around them poorly. They both end up dead. And I think we're supposed to think that this other brother was kind of in the shadows and was a little better, and he survived and it's okay. Even though, as you pointed out, Donovan, he says he played both parts and they played them equally, so he was just as culpable in all of the bad things. But the movie, I think, gives us the sense that somehow he's a little better so that we feel better about the ending, right?
I feel like another not a tip off, but there's the moment where Borden is yelling at Fannin to like, why can't you figure this out? And I feel like that one is evil Borden. You know what I'm saying? The one that's like, and like, and he's like, he's quieter. Other Fannin's, we're getting the top down shot. He's quieter, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like he's the one that's in love with his wife, is the one that's trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So, and Fannin,
and
or not Fannin, Borden, sorry. In that case, Borden is the one who's like more driven, who's the one who's going, and like he's the more artist one, right? He's the one that's whatever, yeah. So.
Right. Yeah, we also see at a point right before the suicide where Borden is yelling at Sarah, and then we go to another room, and Fannin goes and picks up and takes care of the little girl, right? And so that just gives us more associations with Fannin as the good guy, but also as the one who loves Sarah and theoretically the one who is the father, the biological father, although again we don't know.
Right now in the
and
chat,
both of them clearly care for her, right? Because even when he's in jail, even the bad Borden only cares about making sure that she's okay.
That's why it's a little tricky there. In the chat right now, our good friend Joe Williams, he commented, Fannin was always the one that was obsessed with the craft. Fannin went and saw the Chinese magician. That's what Joel says in the comments right now as we're live. It's complicated. Again, they're interchangeable. Again, that's why I find it hard to, even align with Borden, even at the end, because of that culpability. And it feels no, you go ahead.
Well, it makes me wonder because I agree with you, Donovan. I do think there's subtle hints each time one of them's on screen about who's a little more calloused versus who's a little more easygoing or whatever. I wonder, in Act 2 when Borden or Fannin, one of them, is being more antagonistic, right? The one that's going to Angier's show and killing the bird, or the one that's going and finding Angier's double and getting him drunk and making him think, letting him realize he can blackmail them. I wonder to go back to those scenes. I wonder if there were subtle hints that we were dealing with the board, like the more stern one, the more callous one in those scenes. So was it? You could be argued that if that was that one, then really he is the driving force behind the conflict and the bad things that happen in a lot of the film. If he's the one that tied the knot, he's the one that antagonizes Angiers afterwards, all of these kinds of things, then I do see a version of, or at least someone could watch this movie and be like, of course, there was the bad one that did all the bad stuff, and then there was the good one who was good, even though we could obviously say that the good one was culpable for not trying to stop his brother from doing bad stuff or something. But.
Well, I think you're right, and it's subtle, but I think it is there, sort of these two versions of Borden, because the other thing is that we have a conversation between Borden and Fannin in which Fannin tells Borden, let it go, stop worrying about Angier's version of the transported man, and we have to assume then that it's Borden again using our shorthand,
Bad Borden.
who then goes to the trick or to the show and gets gets lured backstage and then gets framed for the murder, right? Because then later he says, I should have listened to you and I shouldn't have done that. And we know that he's the one who loved Olivia, the one who was in jail loved Olivia, and the one who lives at the end loved Sarah. So we know that that's quote unquote the good Borden, right? So I do think consistently there is a laying out of that between the two characters. But you are right. The more you think about it, then you want to go back and watch all the scenes with Borden and go, are there any hints as to which Borden this is in the scenes where it's not clear, right?
But
Which,
even
again,
just the actions he's taking seem more bad. I'm just saying bad. I know Joel keeps correcting us, who's Bannon and Fannin, or Borden and Fannin. I'm just going to say bad Borden or good Borden because the actions that are taken, the killing of the bird, the seducing the double to blackmail, those definitely feel more Borden-like. Like, from what the movie does give us of the different characters, it definitely feels like that's more a character thing for him. But.
I also just want to take a second real quick to talk about the acting in this movie. It's just fantastic all around. Right now on my screen I have Angier and his double. And when he first came out, I was like, I mean, I've seen this movie a lot now, and I was kind of like, man, it's just Hugh Jackman. It's obviously it's almost breaking the reality a little bit. Like, oh, they found someone who looked just like Hugh Jackman. But then, as I started watching it, I started believing it was a different guy because his nose is slightly different, his teeth is different. Hugh Jackman just has a certain swagger to him. It's totally different. And I was like, no, that could just be a totally different guy. And their acting in this is just phenomenal. And when we even talking about it in general, man, people don't know about this movie, I feel like, enough. It's so good in all facets of it. And I just want to talk about even Hugh Jackman doubling too, and how good a performance that is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in fact, there's almost sort of a joke there, right? Isn't there? Because he finds a person who's supposed to be his double, and it literally is him, right? I mean, it literally is Hugh Jackman.
Yes.
So it almost functions as a bit of a meta joke as well, which I think is great. And then, of course, commenting on the fact that, Christian Bale, does have an actual double, right? That Hugh Jackman's character, that Angier doesn't believe that, right? So I think there is a lot of fun in having him play the double. And you're right. It's interesting that the double does start feeling like someone different, which is amazing on Hugh Jackman's part.
It's pretty crazy.
It's pretty astounding how many times the movie literally, I know we've mentioned this from the beginning with the boy and the bird saying where's his brother, but the amount of times the movie, and I think it works because it also feels like it's thematic to the idea of illusions and magicians, is that it shows you the trick. It tells you what's going on the whole time. It just presents it in such a obvious manner that you can't possibly believe that, right? And that's the same thing Angier's is doing, right? Even when Olivia gets sent as the spy, and I love it. I think that was a great way to just another way the movie keeps flipping characters on us. With we think Olivia is aligned with Angier all the way up into the point that I guess Angier finishes reading Borden's diary in Colorado, but her being like, no, there is something going on. There's makeup and stuff everywhere. I don't ever see someone using it. They keep pounding it really over our heads. Hey, it's a double. There's no other way this could not be a double. And I think the beauty of it then is that this movie, it sets out pretending that it's very realistic, very grounded. This is just illusions. It's a trick of the light, a hand trick, whatever. And then all of a sudden, in the end, it becomes science fiction. And even with that reveal of the science fiction, it almost is like, well, of course something crazy is going on with Borden too, right? Like it makes you even more believe that of course it can't be like, it's got to be some, I don't know, ancient tomb or tome that is like some magical power that he's doing this or something. I just think it's just watching it again. I was just again amazed about how many times the movie just wants to tell us, but it is brilliant in its presentation because it never feels believable.
No, I mean, that's, you mentioned earlier, you think it's the best twist in a movie of all time. I still think that honor goes to The Sixth Sense, just because mainly just a popularity level of how everybody knows that, but they both do the same thing, and this is what makes a movie with a good twist, and with a bad twist is that, it layers in those things that whenever the twist does happen, they were always there, they were always staring you in the face, but when you go back that second time, you're like, oh, it's so obvious. The worst kind of twist is an example, the movie called Devil, also produced by M. Night Shyamalan. They're trying to figure out who in the elevator is the bad guy, and as people die, you're like eliminating who the bad guy could be because they're dying. And at the very end of the movie, one of the corpses comes back to life, and it was one of the people who died in the movie, right? So it's like, that's a really bad twist because you're not giving the audience the chance to be in on the joke or in on the investigation part of it. When you take that investigation away from us, and you make it, we feel like we've been duped, whatever. But when you do it like this, where they kind of layer in all those little hints, I mean, and I'll give this, the Prestige probably gets the award for most hints ever, for setting that up and somehow still pulling it off.
To me, that's why it's the best twist, is because I agree. I think The Sixth Sense is a great one, but to me, this movie, when you rewatch it, it's like, how did I miss this? Like, at least with Sixth Sense, it's like, okay, there's some, how they worded that line, that really benefited the ruse the kind of movie is setting up in the beginning.
Sure, and
well, he could have said it this way, but he said it this way, and that's why it keeps up the illusion. But for this movie, it's like, no, we're just going to tell you over and over again what is happening.
Yeah, I see the argument. Get it. I lean more towards that one being the best, not my favorite, but the best because of its worldwide like appeal and popularity, I guess. But yeah. I understand what you're saying 100%. But anyway, that's how you do a good twist versus a bad twist. Never pull the rug from the audience. Always layer in the ability for the audience to figure it out. That way, also, when it does happen, if they do know what's going on, they also feel validated, like, oh, I figured it out first. That's also really important as an audience member. Sometimes you don't always want to be ahead of them, but if it does happen, you want them to feel validated. You don't want them to feel like, oh, I could have never figured that out because the movie was completely lying to me in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, 2 quick points. First of all, I think an even better example from M. Night of a bad twist is the movie The Village.
Horrible twist. Horrible.
But you're exactly right, does the exact same thing. That is, it gives you no hints of this is what is going on. And so when it comes at you, you feel the writer, right? You feel the presence of the writer. It hasn't been woven in. And you're right, it hasn't given the audience even a chance to try to figure it out. The other thing I'll say about the twist in this movie is it's not just a twist. It's like 4 twists, right? You guys have been saying it like it's one thing, but, obviously we're going to get here in just a second, but we're talking twists for both diaries, twists for both tricks, right? So we've got a minimum of 4 twists, right? So
the final shot is a reveal. The final shot of the movie is another reveal of a twist, like basically another reveal of a twist, right? Like zooming through the chambers of bodies. We really don't understand fully what's been going on with that till we see that. And
so I never really. I feel like that. I don't know. I could see that as an argument, that being a twist, but for me, it was kind of always, maybe because I've seen the movie so many times now, but it's understood that he was killing those other ones before that final shot. Granted, we do see the gun there, and it's more like, I think the moment's supposed to be the full realization whenever he's talking to Borden, right, when after he's gotten shot.
Yes. That's what I did the first time.
Yeah, I don't know. The hat thing really sells it.
Whether it's the final shot or not,
right?
It's still a twist that...
I guess so. To me, the hats really set that up, like, completely. Like, because even Tesla says, which one's the real hat, and then he goes, Tessa says, they're all your hat. Like,
It does on the rewatch, but for the first time, I did not.
Yeah, the first time you're watching that, I don't think you really, like, even if it tells you, you don't really understand what's happening, partly because you don't fully know the trick yet either, right? So it's like,
well, maybe I'm just smart.
You get a hint on how the trick works, but you haven't seen the trick yet, and so then you see the trick, and you're kind of piecing it together, but the movie's so complicated. Yeah, I think you have to go back to beginner's mind on that and remember.
I don't remember
really what it was like the first time,
And at the very least, there's the twist of like the kind of grotesqueness.
Sure,
of
I'll give you
what
that
he's
one.
doing. He's drowning himself every time, and he doesn't really know which was the original.
Well, here's my thing on that is that I fully believe the real Angier died the first time he did the trick. Like that, like the first one died that night. Like there's one of my favorite things in Breaking Bad ever is like when the two guys are talking about Star Trek and how every time Captain Kirk got into the teleporter and he teleported, it was actually killing him and reforming like an exact copy of him somewhere else. Like so he died like a million times, which I think is brilliant. I think it's the same thing here. I mean, clearly, you could always say he's being teleported and the copy is dropping, but it feels like to me that's not really what's happening. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, the teleportation problem is actually a really famous philosophical problem about the nature of what something is, right? And how many. It's also there's this. I don't know if you've heard of this problem called Theseus's ship, where so if you replace every board in Theseus's ship,
we know,
and then you've replaced the whole thing, right? Yeah, I mean,
hashtag white vision. We know what that's about. Yeah,
if you do science fiction or whatever, exactly. I mean, you run into these things, and so the movie is certainly playing with that as well. But back to that set of twists, in getting to our maybe, kind of getting into the second half of the movie, that Act 3 and the way in which, basically, in my mind, Act 3 has like 5 climaxes. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that has so many, even if they're not literally like the success or failure of a goal, just the number of things that are leading to your sense of a climax, right? Angier discovers that the diary is a fake. Angier discovers that the machine actually works. Borden discovers his diary is a fake and he's been set up. Sarah hangs herself, right? All of that happens in about 10 minutes, back to back to back to back, one scene after another. I mean, it's insane how many things. I mean, obviously Sarah hanging herself isn't a twist per se, but how many things are being revealed to us so quickly at the end of that act is incredible.
Hey, I just thought of something that's important. Okay, so if the movie starts off with Borden reading Angier's diary, then what we're seeing is Angier's writing of the diary. Like that's Angier's telling his point of view, right, about the story, which is most of that, right? So like when we do see Borden tie the knot, that's Angier's perception of what he think probably Borden did. Maybe Borden / Fannin really didn't know what kind of knot they pulled.
That's a great point, except that flashback is actually not initiated by either diary, which is really weird. That is, to the best of my recollection, the only flashback that's initiated by Cutter. And Cutter is telling the judge, because the judge, I wrote this one down because it really stood out to me.
Okay.
The judge comes to see the mechanism, right? Because he says, I've got to see the secret.
That's right.
And then he's like, how can we know? And he says, this tank had, a special meaning to these magicians. And then we flash back to the death scene. And so it does seem to be Cutter's flashback. Although then afterwards we see Angier reacting, putting his head in the water, and that's clearly can't be Cutter's flashback anymore. But of course, I think we're used to by now Hollywood cheating its flashbacks. They're not always aligned with the person who initiates the flashback. But yeah, the movie really does set that one flashback up as coming from Cutter.
And that's really smart because that is something that you could have easily set up from one of the other two characters, like, and kind of just not thinking through it too much. Which I think then, I mean, Cutter is the only reliable narrator of this whole film. I don't think ever Cutter is leading us astray. I think he sets up the whole idea of the magic trick, the prestige and all that kind of stuff. And then he kind of comes in at the end with a more active role in like the finale. But like, he's the only one that ever that doesn't at some point trick be like, oh, it was kind of lead us astray.
Well, he's us. I mean, he is us, right? I mean, he is the stand-in for the viewer, and what he thinks about the characters is, I think, what we're supposed to think about the characters. You know, for the most part, even though he says it's a double, he obviously doesn't know, and that Borden has a twin. So I think he's always in the dark when we're in the dark, right? I don't really think, other than maybe little minor things, that he has knowledge that we don't have, because the two magicians keep him in the dark on all the major things as well, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I just watched this last night. Why did Cutter switch over to Borden again? Is it because of the daughters involved? Is that why?
It was because once he figures out what Angiers has done, once he figures out that he's set him up for murder.
Okay, gotcha.
And fate. Once he figures out Angiers is alive.
That's right, because yeah, when he shows him his daughter, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, and really, he only switches sides right at the end, right? I mean, we barely have any amount of the movie because there's 10 to 15 minutes left when 13 minutes in my notes when Cutter just figures out that Angier is alive. When Angier, I mean, I think Angier allows it, but when Cutter comes to his house, as Lord Cordlow.
That's right, yes. Lord Cordlow. Good name.
And jump in if there's anything else y'all want to discuss up to this point. But are y'all ready to kind of start discussing the alignment, the finale, how we're feeling about characters here? Is there anything?
Let's do it.
Before we get there?
Yeah.
I mean, just as a preface, Angiers, he looks like just the most like stereotypical evil mustachy man in these final scenes. Like what he looks like, he's gone like full evil mastermind. I mean, the twirly mustache and everything. I definitely feel like, for me, the film wants to align us more with Borden than with Angiers. Yeah. I feel like in some ways this movie is about like it's an origin story for the evil superhero that Angiers becomes by the end of this man that is obsessed, and no one will get in the way. He's willing to do anything to anyone to fulfill his obsessions. Whereas, and I do agree that by the end of it's not a clear winner. It's not like, oh, Borden was clearly the most morally upright person here, but more of like, and again, because we're, I think, supposed to assume that the better version of him survived. It's like, well, this was the best that the situation could be resolved once it had gone to complete shit almost by the time we're entering into Act 3. And he's got Angier has the Tesla device. But yeah, for me, it's a Borden alignment.
I think maybe the movie wants us to do that, but again, I don't think. I mean, Angiers to me doesn't ever do anything to hurt anyone else on purpose. Like,
what about framing Borden for murder and having him murdered?
Well, besides Borden, who's a piece of shit, as we've learned, right? But Angier's not a good person either, for in a way, but. For me, like, Borden also does the trap on the stage and gets that woman's hand. He does that.
But to me, though, if we're going to assume that he did do that not on purpose, I don't believe he did that not on purpose in order to kill her. I think he did that not on purpose because he's prideful and he thinks he knows better than other people, and he thought, this is the better thing to do. But I do not think he said, I want to hurt this person.
No, I know.
I'm going to tie this knot.
Well, he did that.
I will say that Borden has no premeditated murder.
I was talking about the bird, where he cuts the thing on the bird and the cage slaps it on that woman's hand. Like, it cuts her too. Oh. Like, he's
but I mean,
he's doing things to other people. Murderer. Well, I know, but I'm saying, like, to me, he's doing things to other people, like, even if it's collateral damage, more so than Angiers is doing. It feels like Angiers is always directed towards him, I don't think like Borden wants to hurt the other lady, but like it's also like he doesn't care. You know, I feel like Andrews is not doing that kind of stuff. Like you don't see him actively not caring about other people, even though it also doesn't show him like actively caring about people either. I just feel like it's a slight, you know, little difference here, you know. And again, I think back to our other thing, you know, obviously the movie wants us to align with Borden and them because Borden survives, in my opinion, when it shows it's the good one surviving. But I think, you know, just by the nature of like him saying I don't know, and then him being deceptive the whole time, like he cheats on his wife, he, you know,
Kinda.
he's cheating on even the other girl with his wife. You know what I'm saying? Like all these things, like he's not a great guy. He's feel like he's less likable to me than Hugh Jackman. Also, it's Hugh Jackman, so I like Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
But
Donovan, I agree with you, and I think I don't know if that's a slight flaw or complaint in the movie, but I agree with you. I think the way the movie ends, the way that Cutter is our stand-in, and the way that Cutter takes sort of the good Borden side, that we're supposed to sort of feel like events have played out the way that they're supposed to. And I think if we really, and that's why I wanted to dig in earlier about good Borden versus bad Borden, because if we believe and interpret the movie that there is sort of a good one and a bad one, and the bad one dies and the good one survives, then I think it might be, maybe it's okay. But because the good Borden at the end says that both of them were both of them all the time, it is harder. You do kind of treat them as sort of one lumped big Borden, right? And I agree with you. You know, I mean, you start off with, okay, both guys are ambitious. One guy is in love, one guy is not. This guy kills the other guy's wife. Not on purpose, I agree, but because he's got a big ego, and then seemingly lies about it, right? So now we've got Angier wanting to get revenge. Now, of course, in real life, do we think it's good that revenge means that you kill someone who killed someone you love? No. But in movie world, like, we kind of are okay with that, right? Revenge is oftentimes an okay, not great motivation. So he's doing that, and then it's sort of like, kind of like Donovan said, well, who's getting hurt and why in their battle? And, you know, Angier has already lost his wife. He falls in love with this woman, and yes, he does something very callous, right? Which is he sends her to spy on his rival. But even when he then confronts her and she has given him some information, but also is still working for Borden, he says, like, you know, she says, I love him, and he says, I will go ransack his studio so that you don't get blamed, right? Like, even then he's being slightly, you know, he's not a great guy, but he's still being thoughtful of her, right?
Well, she says she loved him after that. He says that, to be fair. She says that as he's leaving the room. She says, I do love him. And he said, yeah, then I know how hard this was for
again,
him.
We're teetering here on who's good and bad, but it feels like we're just teetering slightly more that Angier's better. You know? I think it's...
Well, I think like you said, though, so then Borden, like you said, I mean, Borden says he lived half a life, you know, or I guess it's the good Borden says that they each lived half a life and that was okay. But also, in doing that, they destroyed a woman's life who committed suicide, and they could have destroyed another woman's life, but she kind of got out because she was just like, this whole thing is ridiculous, and she gets out of there, right? And then I guess you've got whether Angier's getting Borden's daughter is overly, is that too evil? But then Borden doesn't seem like a really great guy to be raising a daughter anyway. So it is tricky, you know, and it's tricky to figure out. And I kind of find myself leaning towards Angier even at the end of the movie. And there's one other thing I want to add, which to me is a huge part of how we feel about the movie. At the end, after good Borden has shot Angier, right? So by the way, the Bordens have now been responsible for 3 deaths, whereas Angier has only been responsible for 1 death, if I've counted correctly. They have this debate about why they do magic, right? And it seems, in my view, that Angier's is the better argument. Angier's reasons for being a magician seem much less selfish and much more compelling than Borden's, even though the movie has set up partway through to make us think it's a selfish thing for why he wants to be on the stage and see the prestige and have the audience's reaction. At the end, he tells us the world is hard, the world is difficult. Everybody knows that there's no magic. There's nothing that we can't explain. And so for that one moment when I can give them a sense of wonder, I do it, and I see the look on their faces and I see them feeling that sense of wonder. That's why I'm a magician. And I'm just like, yes, like I'm so on board with that compared to Borden just, his nickname is the professor, right? It's all about figuring out the trick, right? And of course, everyone agrees he's the better magician. He's better at figuring out the tricks. But Angier knows, in my mind, the actual secret of why you would want to be a magician, right? And what it does for people. And that makes me like him a lot right at the end of the movie, which makes it even harder then to sort of be okay with the events and with good Borden kind of ending up being the survivor and the one I think we're supposed to be on board with.
It's super complicated. And I think that's part of what makes this movie so compelling, right?
Sure.
Is that and great potential for something like this, like dissecting it at this level, because I think you guys make great points. And I do think there is this question of like, who's more likable versus who was more, it's this question of, does it matter how premeditated some of it was versus like, because I do feel like Borden is like this guy that just has this weird obsessive life view that just causes destruction around him. And I don't think a lot of it is intentional, but I don't think a lot of it is either. He doesn't really care either. There's not too much worry about it at the same time. Whereas you have Angiers, who is this guy who bad things happen to him that sets him on a path of revenge where he ends up losing a lot of his humanity, right? Like he comes out on the other end a shell of a human in some ways, that he's willing to kind of, do these things without second thought, right? And so there is this question of like, well, is there more of a human left in Borden by the end of this movie? I think maybe there is. I think there maybe is like more of someone that might be able to say, you know what? I fucked everything up, but I can change because I can see a new way to do things, versus where I feel like we're left with Angiers. I feel like if he didn't live, or if he did live, if he wasn't killed by Borden at the end of this movie, I assume the rest of his life is just like a black death, right? Just this cloud of depression and like just waiting for death, right? That he has what else is he going to live for?
What does he have to live for? That's a good point. Yeah.
Versus Borden actually saying, well, at least, I mean, I would hope that if he's not a sociopath, he does, right? They say they share regrets with one another. I should have listened to you. We should have done this. We should have done that. Yeah. That you do see a person that might make changes in his life after the events of this film. Maybe he is a better dad, after this, after all of this. But it is super complicated. It's not clear either way, or it doesn't. For me, I'm not. It's a game of margins about who I feel more aligned with, or even who because I do like Hugh Jackman's character more. He's just more, just ecumenical, big, just
he's a better showman.
Presenter.
Yeah, he's the greater showman, one could say.
He's the greatest showman, right? Yeah. Yes.
Well, here's another thing too, Daniel. Another thing too is that at the very end, Angiers does not take the prestiges from Borden, and he also goes back to destroy the machine, right? So like it feels like there is like some type of
because he accomplished his mission, which was to kill Borden, and so like his life is complete. His goal in life at that point was to murder another man, and at that point his life is meaningless almost.
Yeah, but it does feel a little to me like he has the ability to move on, though. That, what I'm saying, like I mean, maybe I'm stretching it, but I'm saying like I feel like he has that as well, is I'm pointing out.
I don't know. I mean, I think Daniel makes a good point on that. The one thing that I think there could be hope had he stayed alive is Borden's daughter, and what kind of relationship Angier and Borden's daughter would have. Would he have always sort of hated this daughter and just sort of raised her but not really loved her, or would something have cracked in him, and the love that he had for Julia at the beginning, might somehow, come to this girl. Obviously, we can't know. That would be pure speculation. But I kind of think about, in my mind, I think about this as a little like Twilight. Are you on Team Edward or what was the other guy?
I agree.
Team Jacob. Team Jacob.
Team Jacob, right? And I keep watching and I keep really analyzing, and I always end up on Team Angier at the end of the movie.
I understand, because I do too.
But like I said, I think that's a show of its quality, of that it is this
big,
complicated movie with 10 reveals and a couple major twists and 3 different narrators and 2 different main characters, and by the end of it you don't really know how you feel about any of it. but it's not this kind of like, oh, I'm mad because I feel like the movie was confusing or intentionally vague. It's this like, wow, this honestly feels more like real life in some ways, of how much this whole movie's a gray area. Right, there's no black and white. Yeah. There's no clear knight in shining armor and clear evil to defeat. It's a bunch of people with that shit has happened to, or that they're they see life a certain way, and you're just getting all of this conflict resulting out of this that ends up just creating a bunch of destruction for everyone involved.
Right.
And there is not a happy ending. This isn't a happy ending for anyone. It's a satisfying ending, but yeah.
The question,
happy as an audience to experience what a well constructed and awesome movie. Yeah,
I know. In the beginning, we talked about the reasons why we liked it, but I do want to kind of just put a button on or a bow on this all. And my question to you guys is, why is this your favorite Nolan film? Nolan has specific things that he does in his movies: structure, time, all those kind of things. Why do you like this movie better versus the Batman Begins or Inception or Insomnia or something like that? He does a lot of these similar things, but what about this particularly do you guys like it more so than the others?
Yeah, for me, it's just kind of what Daniel was just summing up, which is, in a way, for me, this is by far the most human of all of Christopher Nolan's movies, in terms of the richness and ambiguity of the characters. It has all, like you said, Donovan, it has all of the stuff we want. I mean, obviously it's not as action oriented as some of his other movies, but in terms of, the large ego, generally male characters, the multiple timelines, the tricks, the complicated narrative. It's got all of that, just like a lot of his other movies, but I don't want to say it has a heart. That's a little too cheesy, but you know what I mean? It combines all of the fun stuff with really compelling characters who constantly have me wondering and, have me debating with other people who's good and who's bad and why and all that kind of stuff. For me, that's, I think, plus I love magic. I did magic when I was a kid, so I always have a special place for movies about magic. But yeah, that combination, I think, is just something that I've always loved. And as much as I enjoy his action movies, I never quite feel the depth of character that we get in this movie. And I would love to see that. And, I would say a movie like, what's his World War I movie?
Dunkirk.
It does a little bit more of that, but it's still kind of very surface oriented, and it's more about the events and actions than it is a lot about digging into the characters. And so, it seems like he's gone away from that, and even Tenet was like no character at all in my mind, So I'm really curious to see what he does with, I guess Oppenheimer is going to be is the title of the next one. Like, that has an opportunity to really get back into some of the moral quandaries that are raised in this movie, so I'm excited to see maybe him hopefully returning to a movie that balances these things out, the fun and the character complexities. That's my answer as to why it's my favorite.
He does have a tendency for style and over substance, And again, his
More
style
recently.
is pretty damn good,
Sure,
So
yeah, and it's a ton of fun, yeah.
yeah, it is.
And I would say for me, I wouldn't say it's my out and out favorite Nolan film. For me, it's maybe the most impressive one. And a lot of that is narrative. Like, of course, like visually, it is still stunning. I think, that shot in the early part of the movie where they're going in on the hotel looks like straight out of a Batman movie. Like that, I think that was one of those times you're like, oh yeah, this feels like that kind of thing. But to me, this is the most maybe just impressive movie. And that is very much at a narrative and character level, right? Visually, it's not like there's no like vistas or these giant like, ridiculous shots where I'm like blown away at a visual level. It's all richly thought through and it's all very well done. But I would say that the appeal of this movie is the characters, is the plot, is the intricacy, how complicated this is, how intricate the net is, and yet still holds up not just okay, but like superbly well. That to me is where it's like, holy crap, this is just like on another level than a lot of other movies can even imagine it being at. I would say that like at emotional level, I do prefer some of his other movies. Like in terms of movies that, hit me in the feels or like make me feel something about like the world. Like I really love, like just at a purely sentimental level, I really love Interstellar. And that movie at a plot and character level is a little bit weaker for sure than this film. But at an emotional level, I enjoy it in a way that I don't enjoy this film. But to me, it's more like this is maybe one of the most. To me, it's his most impressive film. It's the film that I feel like, maybe I'm just inferring. It feels like the film that took the most to pull it off successfully, versus his other films in some ways. And to me, that's just really just inspiring. Like I aspire to want to write like he writes in this movie and how he makes these characters and his plot.
Well, to be fair, also, let's not forget about Jonathan Nolan. I mean, it feels like, Interstellar is kind of where you said that it's not as, it was his last one he wrote with Chris was Interstellar, and Dunkirk and Tenet and Oppenheimer are all Christopher Nolan. So by himself, it looks like. So
that's interesting though. I think Daniel made a great point though, because if you guys remember when we did the Dark Knight podcast, I kind of took the role of just picking the plot apart, and it can be picked apart, to be honest. I mean, whether you might you can go, I don't care about that, I love the movie, and that's a perfectly valid response. But when you start analyzing the plot of The Dark Knight, it really does kind of fall apart a lot. And Interstellar has a few things like that too. And I think for me, and with this movie, I can't do that. Like, maybe I've just missed things, but I've watched it as many times as I've watched it. Exactly, and I can't do it. So at least from a narrative screenwriting point, Daniel, I think you're right about it. Feels almost like it took the most care to make sure that everything really just works perfectly. And to be honest, you need it for this kind of movie because it's not a big budget action movie, and a big budget action movie has room. And also it's just, the Batman movies are superhero movies, so they have a little also room for fantasy. Yes, this movie turns into science fiction at the end, but because it's a character drama, you don't have room for that. If you get a plot hole, it's just going to stand out and everyone's just going to notice it. The movie's not moving fast enough to cover it up. So you really have to make sure everything adds up. And you're right. I think it does.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a fantastic movie. I'm glad we did this one, guys. I think we're probably going to wrap it up. We'll talk pretty soon about what our next movie is we're going to be doing, but I'm glad we did this one. It's been on the docket for a long time. Bruce, how can our listeners find you and all the cool things that you do?
They can find me in most social media places like Instagram as @BDHutch, and they can also go to my website, thehutchfiles.com.
And we'll leave a description and a link in the comment section below on youtube.com/24studios, the best place to consume the content. Daniel, how can our listeners write into us?
Listeners, you could write into bit.ly/241mail. Let us know what you thought of The Prestige. I would love to know. I mean, like, literally, I'm looking for plot holes here. So if you see one that we're just glossing over, write it in. You know, we'll bring Bruce back on just to discuss it if it's good enough. You know what? If it's good enough
also,
to, like...
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, yeah, if it's good enough to, like...
Also, Team Angier or... Yeah, Team Angier
exactly,
or,
yes.
or Team Borden as well. Sorry.
I want to blow up
Let's be
Twitter
honest,
with how many hashtags.
It's simply just a level of just physical attraction. Angier's has it in the bag. Christian Bale, I love you, man, but you're not Hugh Jackman. You're just not. There's one shot where Hugh Jackman's like got his like sleeveless, and I'm like, holy shit, he got ripped for this movie. He didn't have to, but he did. So bit.ly/241mail.
And of course, if you can't inappropriately, you can always leave a comment in the comment section below, just like Joe Williams did of 241 Joe fame. You can always do that. You can interact with us on the show, and we'll try our best as we're pushing along. I'm not quite sure what our next podcast is, but I'm sure it'll be something exciting and fun on 241 Joe, or no, on 241 in general. We've kind of watched and caught up on everything, so I don't really know what it's going to be. So we'll figure it out.
We're at this weird gap where nothing that is like huge is on. Like there's no like.
You should watch
Marvel or Star
Wars. We need to do Nope. We'll do Nope. Maybe we'll do Nope.
Oh yeah.
That'd be a good one.
We'll talk about it after we're done here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right, guys. My name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And we have spoken.